Before people had the science to explain the world, they didn't really ask what nature was made of. They asked who was living inside of it. The wind didn't just blow, right? Fire didn't just burn. Rivers didn't just flow. They all moved with intention. And across cultures, the answers kept coming back the same way. The world was alive, and it was full of elemental beings. Now, the important thing to understand here is that elemental beings weren't thought of as creatures in the way we think of animals or monsters now. They weren't heroes, they weren't villains. Most of the time, they weren't really even on the same moral page as us. They were explanations. They behaved the way that their elements behaved. Fire spirits destroyed things. Water spirits were beautiful and dangerous because water is beautiful and dangerous. See where I'm going with this? Earth spirits were slow, they were old, and they were stubborn because the land itself is slow, old, and stubborn. You got it. So let's talk about the earth elementals first. Earth elementals are usually the oldest ones in the stories. They live in stone, in soil, in roots, and in mountains. People describe them as dwarves or gnomes or the little folk who stayed close to the land. And what's interesting is that they're almost never flashy. They don't strike people down with lightning or drag them screaming into the dark. Instead, they have this beautiful tendency to reward people who respect the land and quietly ruin the lives of people who don't. And I love that. Crops failed, mines collapsed. People's luck would vanish. Very subtle, very earth. It's fitting, right? Water spirits, on the other hand, are much more emotional. Rivers and lakes were seen as places where boundaries break down. A place between life and death, between the human world and between something else. And that's why water elementals are often beautiful and tragic and dangerous all at the same time. They lure people in. They reflect things back at you. They change you, or they drown you, or sometimes both. In a lot of stories, water doesn't punish you for being cruel. It punishes you for just flat out not paying attention. Very real. Now, fire spirits show up less often in folklore, at least from what I can find. Fire is obviously seen as unstable. It's hard to control. It's hard to personify. And when fire elementals do appear, they're usually tests. They're trials. They're moments of destruction that force change. Nothing ever stays the same after fire enters a story. I think that's true for real life also. Something is always lost, and something else is typically made possible. Now, fire doesn't negotiate, right? It just does what it does. It transforms. So air elementals are probably the hardest to pin down, in my opinion. They're the wind, they're whispers, they're voices you hear but never quite see. They're connected to breath, thought, speech, and even inspiration. And because of that, they're also linked to madness and to lies. Not cruel lies, just like slippery ones, the kind that drift and change shape. Maybe a tale is told wrong, the telephone game. Air doesn't stay in one place for long, not long enough to be honest at least. So across all cultures, elemental beings follow the same rules. They're tied to a place. They don't think like humans, and it's just commonly agreed on that they were here long, long, long before us. And folklore wasn't exactly trying to turn nature into a fairy tale. It was trying to explain how to live in a world that doesn't care about human intentions. So I guess, in summary, elemental beings aren't really about magic. They're about relationship. They're reminders that the world isn't something you just stand on. It's something you exist within. It's something you take part of. And every culture that told these stories was really saying the same thing. Pay attention to the forces that you can't control, because whether you call them spirits or elementals or something else entirely, they're here.